like your Boy Scouts, your Girl Scouts, your Parks and Rec, working with those types of organizations, serving organizations, there's a badge or a patch that the Girl Scouts have put out that is about diversity and inclusion. And so you may think the Girl Scouts are for girls, but what they're really trying to forward is that the information in this particular patch, the curricula and the conversations, are for everyone. And I think that's a message that we want everyone to have after this call and beyond, is that talking about race and racism is a conversation for everyone, no matter how you identify. And that brings about the challenge, and at the same time, as Korn Ferry would put it, race does matter. So I suggest you look at their diversity, equity, and inclusion programming. And then they also have, I had an opportunity to talk in a panel on Channel 7 with folks, teachers, youth developers, and Dr. Brandy Freeman from Children's Hospital joined us on the call, and we had a conversation about some of the tips for parents and tips for kids, and getting into talking about race and racism. The one that was geared toward the kids, or we actually asking questions. Kids would ask questions about race and racism, school, parents, family, and we got to respond to those. So I would suggest check those out, and that's on YouTube or from the Girl Scouts Facebook page. And then finally, we did have an opportunity to put out a resource. So that's the Children's Hospital Colorado has a resource on how to talk about racism and social unrest going on outside our doors, maybe even inside. And the thing I want to point out about this, and this is a bit of the transparency that I think is necessary when we're in these conversations, is that Children's Hospital wasn't really sure about how to respond to what was happening outside of its walls with regard to George Floyd's murder, or with regard to Elijah McClain's murder. And we are still dealing with that. We're still not sure how to respond to a populace that is specifically based on kids, right? We're a pediatric health organization, and yet and still we talk about social unrest as opposed to police brutality. We talk about social justice, but it's hard for us to name racism. So going forward, this is something that we're working on. So you can see that document, you can see kind of the struggle that we're having in naming some of the things that were going on, and at the same time it being very, very important that in this journey we help others to do so. So I'm going to pause just for a moment to see if anyone has questions about any of these 3 or 4 resources, or about what Children's Hospital is doing with regard to race and racism.
Robert, I just want to say thank you to Children's, and for you for just being open about, you know, the struggle to figure out where your organization stands and what you're active in and what you're not. AHA has, sorry for the background noise, experienced. We are in line with Black Lives Matter. We're supportive of that, but we don't quite know what our programming and what our organization, you know, looks like going forward. So we're lucky to have Children's as a partner and as an example for them.
Appreciate that, Mandy. You know, that reminds me, Mandy, that when we did the Redefine the Redline event was that last year? It feels like it was a long, long time ago.
Like 5 years ago. No, it was last year. Yep.
When we did that, we were talking about racism, right, as AHA, and the opportunity to participate in activities like that right here in Aurora is an important part that we keep going. So I know that was an event, and redlining is still a thing. Gentrification still impacts different racial and ethnic groups differently, and so we should continue those conversations. Yes, police brutality is happening and impacting groups of people. So to Rich's point, what's on the news right now is that those young ladies were pulled out onto the hot pavement, and it turned out to be a case of mistaken identity in the first place. Yes, and there are still people who are being forced out of their homes in neighborhoods in Aurora and neighborhoods in Denver because they can't afford to be there, and it happens to be Black and brown and poor families. Those conversations can happen at the same time. We just have to do the work to make sure that stays at the top of the news list or at the top of our conversation.
Definitely.
Robert, I do have a question real quick. I'm curious to see what Children's Hospital Colorado is doing to educate not just the staff and care team, but also the community in terms of like what does it mean? What does equity mean? What is diversity and inclusion? And just being more specific so that everyone's on the same page and everyone's hearing the same message.
That's an awesome question, Maribel. I take that question, put it on Facebook, and go at Children's Colorado, because we don't have an external definition yet. And the reason that we don't have an external definition or an external stance yet on diversity, equity, and inclusion and what that's going to mean for us inside our hospital is because we're still forming that on the inside of our hospital. We have, both Rachel and Kamila are a part of our flagship program for diversity, equity, inclusion. They are captains of inclusion. And in that program, we talked about what does it mean when we say the word diversity, what does it mean? When we say health equity, what are we even striving towards? What is that going to look like? And so we had a lot of lengthy conversation around what that is, and we're still not there yet. And still, because we're not there, we haven't said anything externally. So while I'd like to say that, you know, in a month or by the end of this year, we'll have something, we're still in discovery phase. And we probably will be that way for the next couple of months, not years, couple of months, with regard to what we want to say. And the reason for that is we are a microcosm of society. Think about how hard it is for national media, for national politics to talk about, let's just say race, for example, or difference or oppression. It's really hard. Those aren't the things that we're able to talk about on our national media or even in our local media. And so if Children's Hospital Colorado comes out and says, well, this is where we stand with regard to what health equity means and what we're going to do about it, there is this tension about how political that might sound, how off-putting that might be because we take in such a diverse group of families, kids, families, and community members. So I think a bright spot that I would talk about is the Black Health Initiative that comes out of our community health section. And that initiative is very, very new and very, very early. And it was pre-2020 that we had a roadmap for it. But because we are including Black moms in how their care looks at Children's Hospital, we have starting to build a roadmap toward how we can be more inclusive and even teach out in the community what it means to be focused on a racial or ethnic background, an identity that is being impacted by our cares and the health system writ large. So that's a long way to say we're working on it, Maribel. And I said that about the Facebook piece because if, as a community member, as the Aurora Health Alliance, you have every right to know where we're going and what we're doing and what we're saying, and you are the kind of folks that we need to push us to do better, do faster, and be more complete about that.
Thank you, Robert.
For sure. Good question. I see Addison in the chat. You're very welcome, and you know, send me an email. We can talk even more. When talking to kids, and I know I don't want to step on Rachel and Kamila's presentation here in a moment, but when talking about race, we also have to think with our kids. We have to think about the fact that we ourselves have been taught not to talk about race here in the United States. And because of that says something in our households when we're sitting at the dinner table. We already have our own internal tension. So deal with that first, because it's going to be at your table when you're talking with your kids about it as well. So with that, I'm going to turn the time over to both Rachel and Kamila. I'm not sure who's going first, but thank you to the AHA for allowing us to have this conversation today.
So thank you, Robert. Yeah. Oh, sorry, Kamila.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, Kamila and Rachel, I'll let you two go. I'm not sure, who wanted to go first, but I'll let you introduce yourselves and take it away so we have as much time as possible. So thanks.
Perfect. So I'm Kamila Shaban. I am a child and adolescent psychiatrist here at Children's Hospital, working through the University of Colorado. And my thought was that I would talk to you all about how to have conversations about race, not only with kids, but also with coworkers and loved ones. And then Rachel was going to talk, I think, more about...
We'll tag team.
Yeah, we'll tag team.
Really, we want to talk a little bit more about how to jump into these really tough conversations. Like I mentioned before, I am a licensed clinical social worker, but also a division administrator within the Department of Psychiatry over at the University of Colorado. I have recently transitioned out of being working directly with kiddos and families as a clinician over at Children's Hospital, which was where I had the opportunity to participate with Robert and Kamila within the Captains of Inclusion program. So Kamila, you want to go ahead and start us off?
I will. So I think one of the most important things that Robert was saying was that first we have to be willing to have these conversations with ourselves and start learning for ourselves. So one thing that I have noticed as an Arab person is that I talk about race, culture, religion a lot because that was part of how I grew up, and I knew I was different, and I was the diversity flagship person for my school, friend group, and family always. So this is not new stuff for me, but I married a very white man, and it is new for him. And I have been having more and more conversations with him and have noticed a couple of things. One, that he honestly believes that the way he was taught in school is that racism ended after the civil rights movement. And two, that you're not allowed to talk about race because that makes you a racist. And if that is how people internalize race and racism, then we can't move forward at all without being able to break that piece down. So I think it's important to remember and re-internalize, one, that racism still exists, and two, that we should be talking about race and racism, and that is how we can overcome it, not just ignoring it. Just like any other problem in the world, if we ignore it, it gets worse, not better. We can apply that back. So I think being able to say that we need to be having these conversations is that first step towards being able to actually do it. I am a relatively new mama. My baby is 18 months. So we haven't had to have a whole lot of conversations about race and racism yet. And there are different developmental milestones, and it's hard when you're talking with kids to know when it's appropriate at which ages to start having those conversations. And when I'm looking at my own child, she is 18 months. What is she learning in the world? One, she's learning that dolls are white, and so kids should also be white, is what I feel like she's learning at this moment. So how do I help her with that? I'm buying more books that have kids with color in them. I have buying some dolls that she can play with that are different ethnicities. And when I eventually start setting her up with play dates when COVID's over, I'm hoping that she'll see more diversity than what is just at her daycare. So that's developmentally appropriate. As we move through the ages, we have to make sure that we have a developmentally appropriate materials for our kids. And I think that the wonderful thing about the internet is that it all exists out there for you already, and you can find different books for different age groups talking about race. But representation really matters, and so making sure that you're watching TV shows that have Black families on them, that you're watching movies that have Black characters, that you're watching or that you're listening or reading stories that have characters who are not all white, and remembering that that default is often white characters, and you have to spend extra time finding those other resources. And it can be really just empowering and important to even do something like watching Black Panther, right? The whole, almost entire cast is Black. Crazy Rich Asians, the entire cast is Asian, so that kids see that there are other people out there than just white families. I really like media for a number of reasons, but one of the things I like is that it just kind of normalizes things. So at my house, we watch Blackish and we watch Mixish. And then I can start conversations with my husband from those TV shows that we watched. And I like young adult books because I work with teenagers. And so I can pick books that I know are representative of different cultures and backgrounds, and then start conversations with kids that way. I think another really important thing to know about just education in general is working through finding some of the bias and identifying it when you see it. John Oliver on Sunday did a great piece in his show about how racism is taught in schools. And if you watch that, you can see, starting from second, third grade, when we're teaching about the history of slavery, we're still victim blaming. We're still saying that people wanted to be slaves or that they were good slaves or bad slaves. That's in our children's worksheets, homework, schooling. So we should be actively involved in all of those things, looking through their schoolwork, seeing what it says, pointing out things to teachers when it's wrong. At our daycare, every month they put up a different hero of the month, and during Black History Month they chose a white hero, and it really sat wrong with me, and so I talked to the school about it. Those little things that we're doing and showing our kids that we're doing, so much of what we do for our kids is modeling. So if you're having a conversation around the dinner table about Black Lives Matter, and then you explain it to them at an age that you think is inappropriate, and as young as 3, 4, 5, kids are picking up on things. So you can find books that help you explain race and racism in a particular age, but know that just like you have questions and want someone to talk to, your kids have questions and want someone to talk to as well.
All right, so before I jump in, are there any questions for Kamila? Okay.
Rachel, you put yourself on mute.
Sorry, I have no idea how I did that. So one of the things that I actually just dropped into the chat is an implicit bias resource that Robert actually introduced us, both Kamila and myself, through the Captains of Inclusion program. It's an opportunity for you to take some smaller, very, very short tests, and it gives the opportunity for you to really think about, where do I have implicit bias? Is it about gender? Is it about race? Is it about ableism? Is it about women in the workplace? So there are varied tests that you can take, and I actually think it's a great resource. I think we had a chance to take them as Captains of Inclusions, and I think that a lot of our colleagues found that they sort of had started this work because they were really pushing forward and considered themselves not to have these implicit biases. And I think a lot of us found that inherent in the way that we were raised or the way that we approach the world, there may be some. So I would recommend that everyone go ahead and do that. One of the things that I wanted to talk about a little bit more was, how are we talking with our kids about it? I think that, like Kamila said, there's a lot of hesitation around starting these conversations. And I'm actually going to do something that probably is unpopular on Zoom, but I'm going to ask for everyone at some point to take their mute off and participate, because this falls a little bit flat without it. But the first thing that I think we need to talk about when we talk about our having these conversations with our kids is about empathy. So, group participation question: what is empathy? It's a tough one. Right? It's one where I think that we are very often worried about getting it wrong. So what I'm going to ask instead is to think about a time when you had really strong emotion, whether it was really positive, really sort of comfortable emotions like happiness or excitement, or really uncomfortable emotions like frustration or anger or sadness, and someone responded in a way that felt crappy to you. That's what I want you guys to share. Share about the response, what they said or did that felt crappy.
This is Shailyn. I'll break the ice.
Awesome, thank you.
You're welcome. I had an experience where someone said, it's not that big a deal. Everybody's dealing with this right now, Shai. And
Yes.
That was a really crappy response. It did not make me feel well.
Totally, right? So that's a classic example of minimizing, right? Here you have this really strong emotion, either comfortable or uncomfortable, and it's, oh, well, kind of get over it. That's one. Can someone else give me another one?
Sure. I'm immunocompromised, so we're being pretty extra on the extremes. We're being very, very, very cautious with COVID. And we recently had somebody dismiss our request for help and safety about that, and that just
that doesn't sit
I'm still mad.
Absolutely, yeah, totally. And looking around, I can see sort of everyone immediately had this like response. So that one didn't sit well. Maybe I'll push my luck here. Maybe a third.
You know, it's a similar COVID response. I keep having a conversation with my brother who keeps saying to me, I keep asking him wear a mask. You know, he's getting more and more lax. He keeps saying to me, don't you think the virus is weakening, Bonnie? You know, it drives me crazy. It's like I'm wrong, he's right. It's that kind of feeling.
Right, so it's sort of like denying, your feelings or the research or sort of the public information that we know about it. Absolutely. So those are 3 great examples. Some of the other examples that I can think of times personally when it hasn't felt great, or when I have been on the giving end of not feeling great responses, is questions. I like to do a ton of questions. So let's say my partner comes home and he's frustrated and he's like, ugh, like I'm just pissed. My first response is to jump in and ask 800 questions. Tell me what's wrong. Who did this? What did you say back? Blah, 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 blah. And I shoot them off 150 right back to back. So he doesn't have an opportunity to say anything. Is it wrong? No. Is it empathy? No. Right? So if I had said, hey, you know, it sounds like you're really frustrated. Tell me a little bit more. That might be a better way to use questions. But my rapid fire questions, not empathy. I also have this awesome habit of doing some problem solving. So same example. Hey, I came home, had a crappy day at work. Cool. So what needs to happen? So did you have this conversation? Did you already say this? I'm seeing a lot of heads nod on this one. Did you do this? Did you do this? Did you do this? Is it coming from a really well-intentioned place? Yes. Is it empathy? No. Okay, so some of the other ones that I hear pretty frequently, I like to call this one defending the enemy. So if you were, let's say you have kiddos and they come home and they're like, I had the worst day at school, my teacher said this to me. And if the first response out of your mouth is, well, what did you do to the teacher? Or something along those lines, well, what did you say? Well, were you acting out in class? Then we've already broken that empathy piece. So I've given a few more examples. Can anyone think of any other responses that they had that didn't feel great? Sort of along those lines.
I'll give one. It's not mine, but I saw it happen at the grocery store actually, where somebody came in without wearing a mask and another gentleman kind of shouted out to the guy saying, hey, wear a mask, you're in the grocery store. And the guy who wasn't wearing a mask, his response was, if you're so scared, stay home.
Yeah.
And everybody around, you know, was shocked and gasped. And the guy said, hey, I'm undergoing chemotherapy. You're putting me at risk. And so that kind of response of like, you know, more of going on the offense.
Yeah, that super offensive, super sarcastic piece. That's, I mean, one, we would hope that when we're having these conversations with kiddos or colleagues or our superiors, wherever we are, that we hope that we're able to kind of hear the sarcasm or hear when we go on the offensive, but sometimes they just sort of slip out. Absolutely. So I've given a few examples of what empathy isn't. So now I'll talk a little bit more about what empathy is. And I think very often we think about empathy and we think about it like sympathy. Oh, I feel bad for you, right? That's sympathy. Empathy is the opportunity to align and understand with how someone is feeling. And that's the really key part of empathy, is that emotions piece, right? So I can do empathy and totally not agree with what's going on. And that piece is really important when we're having conversations, in the larger group space, professional space, or with our kids. I don't have to agree with your perspective, but I can understand that you have a perspective that it is based in your biases, the way that you were raised, and sort of how you interact with the world. So that's number one. When we talk about empathy, we think about it in the therapy world as having sort of empathy stems or way to start empathy statements so that we're not doing things like defending the enemy, going on the offensive, doing lots of questions. So these three things are you look, you seem, or you sound. So I might say, Kamila, you look bored, right? And so that gives me, or Kamila, the opportunity to sort of check in. And Kamila might say, nope, I'm listening to you. It's just really hard for me to look at my third Zoom meeting of the day knowing that I have 7 more. Or, yeah, you know what, you're right. You're just talking too much, right? And so that gives us the opportunity to establish some ability to talk about emotions right off the bat. It gives some of that sense. Sorry, Kamila, for picking on you. So
that's okay. It's really just that I need the potty, and
there we go, right? It could be, gosh, these meetings are scheduled and start on the dot, and I just don't have a chance for a bio break. But that gives us the opportunity for me to say, hey, this is an observation, and for Kamila to say, actually, you've got it wrong. And that's really important, the opportunity to give and take when we're talking, especially with our kiddos. We don't want to put feelings in their or words in their mouths. We want to give them the opportunity to say, gosh, I feel really uncomfortable, or I don't know what to say, or whatever it is that they're going, I don't know what questions to ask. I don't want to ask the wrong questions. We want to give the space for vulnerability. So empathy is really, really important. The second one comes back to this non-judgment piece. And that is very different from having an opinion, right? So we all have opinions, but when it comes to having conversations with kiddos especially, they're going to pick up on what you say, the way that your face says it. And I don't know about anyone else, but it has taken me years of therapy to control my resting grumpy face, I'll call it, or my reactions. So everything that you do, your kiddos, your colleagues, they're picking up on. And so that piece of having an opinion, but also being able to say, I come from a different place and I respect and value your opinion is really important. The last thing that I think is really important, if I were to think of 3 things to start this conversation, is the willingness to know that we're going to make mistakes, and the willingness to be able to say, I don't have all the answers right now. Robert was sharing a little bit about Children's Hospital's responses to culturally what's going on right now, to the murders that have happened, and really spoke about children's responses and how they're works in progress, but they're not perfect. Right? And so I think that that's actually really important as we're modeling for our kids, that there are times where they're gonna ask questions when we don't know the answers, or they're gonna ask questions and we lose our cool, or we aren't expecting it, or we get a little anxious or uncomfortable or frustrated, and that's okay. I think as long as you circle back and you have that conversation with empathy to say, gosh, kiddo, that caught me off guard, or, you know, I don't really know the answer, but maybe this is a place where we get to look at this together or research it together. It gives an opportunity to create some curiosity that is supported. And I think that that's really important. So those would be the 3 kind of go-tos that I have: non-judgment, empathy, and a willingness to make mistakes.
And I think to jump back in on that last bit, the willingness to make mistakes, and the understanding that we don't always know everything right at once, right? So there's something that you can do that you thought was super anti-racist, and then you read more and you're like, oh, shoot, I cannot believe I just did that. Modeling that behavior for our kids is really important too. That ability to make a mistake, learn from it, and come back with a new opinion based off of new information And I think that's what the world is lacking right now, is that recognition that sometimes you get new information and it changes your opinion, and that is okay. And how do you have that conversation too? So always being willing and open to share that journey with your kids, and share your own mistakes and the times where you've done it all wrong, and then show them that you can help change that and fix it.
And Shailin, you threw out a comment in there that this is a great opportunity to build trust with young people. Absolutely. I would say that my sort of expertise is working with adolescents. And when you take accountability, sort of clinically from my own knowledge, when I have taken accountability in sessions and been like, nope, so it turns out I told you something completely wrong, that it sort of allows them to see you as a role model, someone who makes mistakes, but then works really hard to correct it. Right? And so that piece is really important. So what questions do you have for Kamila and myself? All right, you guys are all experts now. Good job.
I have a question. So several of us are parents on this call, of course, but most of us work in community-based organizations.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything that we can be looking at, the behavior of our own organization or others to identify, like, hey, maybe you could do a little bit better, or we can all work on this together to improve, the state of being able to talk about racism with young people?
Yeah.
Any advice there?
Yes. So I actually think that the three things that we talked about with kids are three things that you can use in bigger settings, so professional settings. I think that, hey, taking sort of right off the bat, taking a quick assessment of where we stand. Do we recruit and retain people of color, people who are relatively different from maybe just the way that I look, right? If I'm working at an organization where everyone looks exactly like me, then diversity isn't necessarily super high as a priority. Or if it's a priority, what are we doing wrong? So I would say, let's take stock as the first thing. Kamila, feel free to jump in as well at any point. And then I would have those same conversations. So how do we approach these with empathy and non-judgment? Hey, I've noticed that this is something where I would like us to grow, instead of saying, hey, we suck at this. This is totally the VP's fault because they really only promote white women or Black men or whatever, right? We don't have any people of trans, that must be our VP's fault or our president's fault or my boss's fault. I think that when we come at it with a place of empathy, gosh, do we think that they are feeling a little anxious about having these conversations? If I start the conversation and I create safety in that conversation, is it going to move us forward? I think that starting the conversation, the way that we start the conversation is one of the most important things. And then I think let me just finish this up and then I'll hand it over to you. Then I think going back and reassessing. So coming from an academic background of research, reassessment is a huge piece. If we set these very super lofty goals and we are not checking in on them, those goals may never get met.
Yeah, and just further in how to have those conversations, I think coming at it also from a place of curiosity. So if you are in those meetings and say something like, hey, I wonder if we could figure out why we don't have more people of diverse backgrounds here, or I wonder if we could think about ways to talk with our organization sponsors better, instead of like, we don't have this, but I wonder why we don't have this. I wonder if we could do something differently. Can be a really helpful way to start those conversations as well. And we talk sometimes about the art of calling in as opposed to calling someone out, but bringing open a space where you can say, hey, I've noticed that this is happening. I wonder if you could, if we could talk about it at some point, and here's some thoughts that I have. What do you think? Thanks for having this conversation with me.
And thinking about your audience, right? If I'm doing this at a huge staff meeting and calling someone in or calling someone out, that may be received differently than if I go and meet them separately in their office or ask them to come to my office. I think the other one last thing that I would think about, and it's another thing that I think our captains have picked up from Robert. He says "and" a lot, as opposed to "but." He says "and." Hey, I've noticed this is something, and I'm wondering how we can move forward with this goal. And so I actually like that small change in just the words that we use to incorporate "and" just a little bit more.
Thank you.
Yeah. Actually, on Sunday, I was working in the ER and I had a really great example of, it was more calling out than in, but one of the nurses, we had a guy or a woman who came in for substance use, and we were trying to get her out the door and she didn't have any clothes. And the nurse grabbed some blue scrubs that were paper scrubs. And she was like, "You use meth, you get the walk of shame." And I just looked at her and I was like, "Hey, let's check our biases today." And she was able to just be like, "You are so right. That was rude, totally inappropriate." And went in, talked to the lady, came out. She's like, "She's so lovely." But all day we had to go back and forth of, let's check our biases. Let's remember that there's going to be more people experiencing homelessness in our ERs today because the police just did a huge sweep of all the parks. And let's remember that our privilege allows us to sit here and have a job and have a home and have some comfort, and not everybody gets that. And there's different ways of doing that. And with our patients experiencing homelessness in the ER, I do notice a lot of that, like, oh, why are they here? They're wasting resources. And my best way of calling people in with that conversation is to just say, man, if I were homeless, I'd be in the ER every day saying I was suicidal until I got myself a sandwich. Like, this is how the system works, and this is what I would do because I'm not gonna sleep on the streets. And that helps people remember to check their privilege while giving them that experience of like, this is me and how I would do it as well. So let's take a sec. And it doesn't put the blame back on them. Like, oh, you shouldn't talk about people that way. More just an observation of, I would do the exact same thing. And then everyone can remember to take that moment again.
Thank you both so much for being here and being so open and sharing your personal and professional experiences. I am sure it's quite hard to sit in front of people all day, every day and do that work, but we're really grateful that you are willing to do it and do it in such a, beautiful and touching way that I think a lot of us are. I think people are quiet because the wheels are turning in their head right now. So we really appreciate you being here and sharing your expertise, and hope that we'll continue to all sort of stay in touch. And, if you have feedback about ways that we can continue to do this work as a group, we welcome that as well.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having us.
While everyone is quiet, let me just comment on Rachel and her observation that we really need to take responsibility for mistakes, admit we do make mistakes, and admit maybe we don't have all the answers, but we should be doing something. And that really happened today. And I mentioned that when in the intro, since everyone is quiet. Let me just review with you what I found out about that family that was laid out on the hot asphalt. I was part of the Aurora Key Community Response Team. It's just a group of community members that meet with police and fire and city officials, basically to see how the city is going. And it very much supports them, but it also is able, the community is able to put them on the hot seat. And this was a hot topic. The new chief now is Vanessa Wilson. She did a masterful job, I think, in admitting a mistake and that she doesn't have all the answers, but they're going to get down to how things can change. And the city manager, he actually said something crazy. He said, that within our city, within our government, state, local, there is institutional racism. And we need to find out where it is in Aurora and get it out. In this particular instance, it was a mistake. There's apparently an automated system that will check your license plate. And it's called the LPR, License Plate Recognition System. I didn't know it existed, but it does. So this blue SUV got a hit. It had the license plate of a vehicle that had been stolen. So the officers got that on their screen and they identified, there it is, it has the license plate. What they didn't know is that the license plate was a Montana license plate for a motorcycle. It just happened that this Colorado car had that license plate. Chief Wilson said, officers, they should have checked before they made the stop. They didn't, so that was a mistake. So in a felony stop like this for a stolen vehicle, the policy says everyone has to get out and get handcuffed and lay on the ground. And what Chief Wilson said, the other mistake was the cops needed, there are 5 of them, needed to use common sense. The family was protesting that this car was not stolen, and we're a family and we have children. Officers followed policy. Vanessa said, or Chief Wilson said, no, we need to be able to deviate from policy. Part of our reform is going to be, in incidents like these, we need to deviate from policy if it makes sense. In this case, putting a 6-year-old on hot pavement with a handcuffed did not make sense. Yet we had 5 officers that didn't question that. And Councilmember Hiltz said this was outrageous, that you had 5 guys standing around, not questioning, not brave enough, not stepping up, not feeling empowered to say, hey, we shouldn't be doing this. These are children. We can go ahead and hold them and confirm this, but let's not put them on the ground like this. That didn't happen. But Chief Wilson also said something interesting. She said, part of what we need to analyze with these officers, if this had been a white family, would you have done the same thing? Let's sit down and talk about this. Let's make this a learning moment. And when we go through the reform, and there are 3 vehicles of reform, 3 things going on within reform right now within Aurora, both a independent commission, the city itself, and the budget is going to look, how can we allocate money more equitably into things that maybe shouldn't be part of police. But as we look into that, let's make sure that the candidates who are trained, first we screen them, do you have common sense? Will you just follow orders? Or if situation is somewhat different, will you be able to make an independent judgment? And that needs to be part of the training. But what I thought was interesting, both the city manager stepping up and saying, sorry guys, we have, there is implicit racism. There's institutionalized racism. And the chief of police taking a lot of heat, but just handling it so well that admitting, yeah, we made a mistake, don't have all the answers, but hey, one way we're going to start is in training and selecting our officers and holding them accountable. That did you follow policy, but should that policy, should it have been followed in this instance, this specific instance? And here's a classic example where it shouldn't have been. The officers did not feel empowered to stand up, and not one of them said that, hey, these are children, let's not do this. So that was optimistic and a good sign that we do have an opportunity to come out of this turmoil the city and the whole country is in with some lessons learned that can help us go through change. So I appreciate Rachel bringing out that point. Got to admit that you can make mistakes and that maybe you don't have the answers, but hey, you better step up and try and find answers.
And I think this is also a really important example of of why we do need to talk about race, because 100% this was based off of their race. Because when I was in medical school, one of my friends got pulled over on the interstate, and same thing, thought the car was stolen. She had the exact same name as the person of this person with a warrant out, like to the middle initial. And she, because she was white, was able to say, go check again. This is not me. They did not put her in handcuffs. They did not arrest her. She got to go about her day. If she had been Black, she would have just been arrested. So being able to see, like, yeah, you can say all you want, it's policy, but we're not always following policy. So that doesn't work either. So what was the true root cause of this? It's race. And if we can't have conversations around race, we can't make things better.
I agree. I think it also suggests really taking a look at implicit bias when we're thinking about, and you had used the term institutional racism. Another term that's being used is structural violence, and really thinking about the policies that we're putting in place. What are the downstream consequences? But also, how can we address some of these older policies that don't make sense anymore? Rich, I really appreciate you bringing that up, because I think that for the police departments who are having these conversations and taking accountability and saying, hold on a second, something isn't sitting well, this doesn't work anymore. I'm hopeful for those areas and those police departments and those organizations, because I think those are the ones that are going to not only do things better, but stay relevant. I think that the ones who sort of hold on to, well, this is the way that we've always done it, so we're going to continue to do it, I think selfishly and biasly, I'm not sure that I think that they'll continue or stay relevant.
In the John Oliver piece, which I recommend everyone watching if you get a chance, one of the things he was talking about was if we're not learning the history of things and truly understanding the history of racism and white supremacy in this country, things don't make sense. And that is one of the things that kids are struggling with, is this concept of, wait, there was slavery, but then it's over, but then there was racism, but then it's over, and now what's happening? They can't put the pieces together. And so if we're not willing to really talk about our own history and why these things are relevant and why race does matter, it's not going to help the next generation of people change the system that is broken.
Rich, can you share, is that group that you go to, the meeting with the Aurora, I think is it fire and police? Is that open to the community? I can't remember.
Yeah, it is. They want to make sure that if you're a community member, that they know who you are. So for instance, Joe Laviano, we kind of had a side conversation. I'd be more than willing to invite her to come in and be part of it. And so it's not promoted publicly. They just want responsible citizens to be there. Responsibility doesn't mean that you rubber stamp. Responsibility means you can and are able and appreciate it if you ask the hard questions in civil ways. So yeah, in that sense, it's open, but you'd have to work through one of the AKCRT, Aurora Community Response Team members to become part of it.
Well, thank you for participating on that. I think I went with you one time.
Yes, you did.
I think
You told us all about AHA.
It happens really early. I think that was my excuse for not going, but I really appreciate you coming and bringing those updates to this group. And hopefully there are people on this call that can participate and provide feedback, because if these meetings are happening, then it's on, it's on us to then provide that feedback and have that conversation with them. So thank you.